Welcome to the best of first-person episodes from Phantoms and Monsters. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of all future uploads.
Child recounts alien experiences. About 2 months ago, my 3-year-old son started having dreams about visitors during the night. A few months before that, he went to the doctors and received the dreaded flu shot, so I passed it off as junior PTSD from that. He talked about a man coming through his wall and giving him a glowing needle on the left side of his head, which is a seemingly normal dream for a toddler with an imagination. The only TV he watches is kid Netflix, and never more than an hour a day under direct supervision. The dreams went on. He would get up around the same time, 2:30 to 3 a.m. almost every night, come into my room to sleep in my bed with me, and I would calm him down before bringing him back into his room. He would go on about the dream as I calmed him, describing a typical monster: black eyes and hair, long fingers, large head. A few days he was obsessed drawing pictures of what he called the doctor that visited him, which just looked like a poorly drawn face. It was only until we went to the library when it came up again. He pointed out a book cover of an extraterrestrial, exclaiming that was what was visiting him. I'm skeptical, he must have seen this on TV, but when I finally start to ask him about it, he explains what happens. This is what I got out of it. Keep in mind, 3-year-old. Man comes through wall. Sometimes it's a being with a big white head with short black hair, big black eyes, white suit. Sometimes it's 2 small blue men in blue suits. They put glowing needle in or around his left ear. My 3-year-old says it's for bugs, and it makes him feel sick and hurts a little bit. He then goes into outer space and talks to them, and gets to play with other kids. Another thing that caught me off guard is there was a paranormal investigator just across the street from our house on the same side as my son's bedroom. I went and asked what it was about, and apparently our neighbor experienced a ghost walking through his backyard for a few nights. It would come from the river next to his house. That's about it, and he hasn't changed his story yet. What I'm more so wondering, since people here are interested in the subject, does any of this sound familiar? Is this something he could have seen on a movie trailer somewhere and come up with on his own? I'm pretty skeptical of all this, but I'm willing to hear any thoughts and maybe ways to ward this off. HH.
Abduction, examined by a hooded entity. I guess the best place to start is a little bit about me. Why? To show I am normal and that something not normal happened to me. I am 46 years old and an engineering manager for the Royal Mail, British Postal Service. Before that, I was a highly qualified and experienced mixed gas diver. 2 jobs where you won't be long if the boss thinks you're crazy. I am not crazy. My wife is aware of some of my experiences. She's sort of indifferent to it and doesn't tell anyone about it, but at the same doesn't judge me. My earliest memories are from about 5 years old. I clearly remember a blue light shining into my room from outside. This would have been in the middle of the night as it was dark outside. I remember looking out of the window and seeing an electric blue disc approx 60 feet across. I didn't realize the importance of this until later in my life. There is another incident, of which I am very hazy, and would have been from the same age. Again a bright light, but this time I remember as the light dimmed, I was no longer in my room, but on a small sandy clearing in a forest of pine trees. Some of the sand had rough lumps of glass, as if the sand had been melted by heat. So, leading into my teens. The reason I mention this period is purely because of the questions raised by Mufin. I did suffer from horrendous migraine headaches as a teen and a couple of notable strange occurrences. To be honest, I will not go into those now, as I do not believe there is a connection. We shall see as this pans out. As I said, I only mention this as I did suffer from horrendous migraines at the time, and the question did bring this up. So, moving into my 20s, I started to experience episodes. The more it happened, the more I remembered. I had a friend at the time, John Haywood. He was the same age as me. For some reason I felt he was the only person I could confide in. He looked shocked when I told him of my experiences, but at the same time intrigued. He asked me to meet him the next night at a local bar and said he needed to show me something. I agreed. That next night I sat at the bar. John came in, walked straight up to me and pulled a book out of his bag. I saw the book and have never read it. I can't. I believe there is a movie of the book, certainly there is one of the same name. I can't read it or watch it. The book was called Communion by Whitley Strieber. The cover of the paperback had a picture. John explained that the picture was an artist's impression of the author's experience. I recognized it. I had seen it. I will swear an oath on anything, including the lives of my kids. I knew that face. Prior to John showing me that picture, I had had a number of experiences. As the number of experiences increased, my knowledge, or rather my memory after the event, increased. As the number of events, or rather my memory of them, increased, I became more and more prepared for them. This came to point that I remembered specifics. My ankles were shackled somehow. I would always be lifted from bed ankles first. I clearly remember on at least 5 different occasions being transported in this fashion. I learned not to fight it and just accept this was happening. On a number of occasions the speed was quite fast. I remember being put back in my bed. I remember lying on a bed, but not my own. I would be surrounded by a team that consisted of one tall one, approximately 1.8 meters, and 6 short ones, approximately 1.2 meters. I felt I was being observed. Until one occasion, the large one pierced my left testicle with an object best described as a syringe that had an appearance of stainless steel. I remember the pain. You don't feel pain in a nightmare, right? This is important. A few months later I was told that I had cancer and had to have the same one removed. As I said, what looked like a stainless steel/silver syringe was pushed into my left testicle. I felt the pain, and I clearly remember it now. This was done by the taller of the entities, who was darker in appearance, clothing. I remember a hood that kept the face in darkness. The process lasted for about a minute. I remember screaming, and the scream came out and it was not muffled. However, I was unable to move. This was not paralysis, I was restrained somehow. After the procedure I lay there in pain for some time. The taller one left. The shorter ones remained, surrounding whatever I was lying on. This occasion is the only time where I recall the descent back to my room, like making a fast descent in an elevator. I remember the shorter ones in my room, moving around me and checking I was okay. On this occasion I recall the feeling of restraint being replaced with a feeling of paralysis. This is where I would fight to breath. I would be completely awake but stuck in that moment. I believe I have been in the presence of the taller one on at least 3 occasions. It's out of the town center, the last road before the countryside. It only occurred to me recently the number of military/defense and space contractors are in the immediate area. I moved to a flat just out of the town center, and this is where the last incident that I can recall took place. Again I was taken up and lay on a table of sorts, metallic body temperature. I do not recall any procedures, just being observed. So, regarding the cancer, I do not smoke and I have not smoked. I have no genetic disposition to cancer and no family history of it. It was quite advanced and came on and grew quickly but did not spread. It was localized to that one point where the syringe was. I did not have chemotherapy, but I did have radiotherapy, which was described as being done for precaution. I made an extremely quick recovery with no further cancer at all since then. I had scans for a further 10 years with no reoccurrences. I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I know what I experienced. At first I was terrified, but as the number incidents took place, I became curious and wanted to learn more about what was happening. I would try and take in what was happening and observe back. All these years later, when I go to bed, I am still mentally prepared for it to happen again, but not since 1999. To be honest, I miss it in a strange way. From that perspective, I almost feel abandoned by them. Maybe that's why it stopped. I was showing just as much interest in them as them to me. There's been some other incidents that I have not mentioned here. These relate to some of the questions you have asked me, and to be honest, I had not thought of them like that until I saw the questions, hence me keeping them separate from my main narrative.
An experiencer's unique daughter. At the time of my first encounter, I was a 23-year-old mom and newlywed. My husband was a proud and possessive dad. And of course my son was spoiled and cried a lot. One particular night, my husband and I had settled in after a minor disagreement about whether or not our son should have his bed in our room or his own. I was a little upset, so I turned away from my husband because I didn't want to be hugged or embraced like we normally did. Within the hour my husband had fallen asleep. However, I was having a difficult time, so I just laid there, staring at the ceiling. For some unknown reason, I was feeling anxious and restless. Every creaking sound of the furnace or heating vent kept me awake. Finally, around 12:30 or 1 a.m. I began to doze off, as I felt my body relaxing. Just as I was entering my deep sleep mode, I felt the covers moving as if someone was climbing up on the bed. In my head I thought, there's no way my son could have climbed out of his baby bed and made it to our room. He couldn't even walk at the time. I also knew my husband was fast asleep because he snored a little. At that point, I decided to turn over on my side and look over the bed. As I began to move, I felt myself be straddled with my back pinned to the mattress. My eyes and mouth felt that they were sealed shut. As much as I wanted to scream and wiggle, I couldn't. This lasted for about 2 or 3 minutes. As soon as I called out the name of Jesus 3 times in my mind, the pressure lifted. Suddenly, I yelled out my husband's name. He abruptly woke up and asked what was wrong. I started crying, saying that someone was in our house and just lifted off the bed. He turned on the light and I began yelling for him to call the police. I ran into our son's room while he called the police. I begged him not to go downstairs until the police came, but he went downstairs anyway in his pajamas. When the police arrived, they searched the house thoroughly, even the basement. There was no sign of any break-in, so they left. I kept panicking, assuring my husband that someone had been in the room, sat on my stomach and covered my mouth and eyes. My heart was beating fast and I was afraid to go to sleep, but afraid to be up by myself. I begged my husband not to go to work the next day. He assured me that he would call during lunch and check on me. That day, I kept my door opened and locked the basement. From that day forward, I wanted to move, and I was afraid to be left alone. When I told my grandmother what happened, she said that it was the devil riding me. I just thought it was a demon trying to attack me because there was friction and discourse in my home, and I was a young new mom. Over the years, I started having dreams that extended beyond my normal sleep pattern. In other words, during my waking hours I felt that the same people I dreamed about were still watching me during the day. They were discussing me and following me everywhere I went as if I were being observed by a parallel dimension. As I traveled, ate and even showered, I felt eyes on me. I never told anyone for fear of being identified as strange. 5 years later, I became pregnant from another relationship, well and after my divorce from my son's dad. I was quite surprised, seeing that the big gap in my pregnancies ever occurred, and seeing that I had an IUD, intrauterine device, inserted a year before to ensure that I would not become pregnant. The biggest surprise was that the IUD had to be removed, and I was already 5 weeks pregnant. As my pregnancy progressed, I was worried that my baby would be affected by the device, or that she would have a birth defect. Nonetheless, I worked during my pregnancy, walked a lot, and even fell on my stomach at 8.5 months, yet my baby girl was more resilient than her older brother. Nonetheless, during my pregnancy, there were times when I felt my body being levitated a few times in the night. I even remember waking up, not being able to open my eyes as I was lowered back to my bed. During my childbirth, the doctors found an extra mass on other ovary. I was gray, its shape resembled a human ear and slippery like a muscular piece of octopus. The doctors placed it in a plastic bag and gave it to me. I inquired of my gynecologist if this mass was possibly another baby that never formed, and they just said possibly. Ironically, despite the hard work, walking and falling never affected my daughter. She has never endured childhood diseases, had a healthier weight than her older brother, her teething came earlier, she learned to walk earlier, and she is much more intelligent than her brother, although both are smart and in the medical field. My daughter is very independent, captures everyone's attention, and has traveled and been accepted in many parts of the world she has traveled. After my daughter's birth and becoming of age, I no longer experience being watched. However, I have developed a strong perception and extra sensitivity to people and voices of people in a psychological and spiritual sense. Nowadays, I feel that there is another entity working inside me, influencing me, and speaking to me from within my brain. It's not a noise I hear. It's like a suggestion of words being transmitted to me at times, giving me instructions. When I encounter certain persons, I can feel their personalities, their coldness. People find themselves saying things to me that they don't realize. Later, when I bring up a conversation that we've had, those same people say, "I didn't tell you that," or "How did you know that?" So I just stop telling them things because they look at me strangely. I feel that my hypersensitivity is because of my encounters with species not of our likeness. I felt I was observed from a highly intelligent transmission within our galaxy, but beyond this Earth. My daughter is shocked and thinks it's unique how I can duplicate some of her thoughts and conversations with her husband while living in a different state. She lives in Illinois and I live in Ohio. I bring up words and private conversations she's had with her husband. Thanks for reading. EC.
Assisted by the Ant-Man. When I was a young child of about 3 in 1965 or so, I started having dreams about once a month that there were big ants in my room walking like people and coming up to the side of my crib and looking at me. I remember one morning as my dad was getting ready to go to work at around 5 a.m., I ran into the kitchen where he and my mother were standing drinking coffee. My dad picked me up and sat me on the kitchen counter and asked me how I got out of my crib. I told him the big Ant-Man let me out. Now, I'm not saying I was abducted by aliens or anything like that, but this did happen for about a year, and my parents were finding me sleeping all over the house, once in the Rambler in the carport. So they started tying me down at night in my crib, and every time I got out, and I don't ever remember getting out on my own or anyone else letting me out except for the one time. I'm in my late 50s now and I remember this clearly, but I would never say that I thought I was abducted by alien. Some of the circumstances could suggest a possibility of it. As soon as you even mention in seriousness that you have a feeling, or that you know you have been in contact with beings not of this world, you are going to be labeled as crazy or a weirdo, and life can become even harder for a person living with this kind of thing. I'm not saying that I did have some kind of contact with beings other than humans. I don't know, because I don't have any vivid memories of being taken anywhere out of my house, even when I was sleeping in the car. What I remember is what could, most likely, have been a recurring dream of human-sized ants being in my room and in the hallway of our house leading to the bedrooms. What kind of bugs me is that the more I think about it, the more I think they could have been greys and I wasn't dreaming. The problem here is that I have been exposed to media all of my life, and can't tell if it's just my mind remembering things this way, and my thoughts have been influenced by the media reports I've seen all my life, starting with Betty and Barney Hill, or if this was in actuality real. I still wonder if that was what happened. I was adopted, by the way, and none of my family members or my brother who was also adopted remember anything out of the ordinary. I can't say that I had any contact because I just can't be sure, but something has kept this interesting to me for this long without any concrete answers, and I just get the feeling that there has always been something either watching or in my life in some sort of hidden way. I served in the military and came close to being killed a few times, and wasn't because of somewhat freak circumstances I wouldn't go into in an online post. I also had pancreatic cancer 15 years ago, and after 9 rounds of chemo and many radiation treatments I was still getting worse. Then in the matter of 6 months I went into remission, and have been cancer-free for going on 8 years now. I had a heart attack when I was all alone at home, what they called a pretty major one at that, and I lost consciousness after I was able to call 911. My front door was locked and I am positive I locked it because I was headed to bed when the heart attack happened, and I always lock my front door and all others too. The EMTs walked right in, the door was unlocked, and I was saved from what would have been certain death if I had waited any longer. How was my door unlocked? You got me. RT.
Incident above Earth. I don't know where to begin and, honestly, I'm hesitant to even bring it up. But I believe there should be a record of my experience. I don't want any notoriety. Nothing like that. I don't want to ever speak about it again, because it scares me so much. This is the truth as best as I can recollect. My experience occurred in the first week of June 2018 near Naples, Florida. I went to sleep around 11 p.m. in a room with a friend who was sleeping in a bed next to mine. We were sharing a hotel room. I go to sleep. Nothing unusual. Then suddenly I woke in what seemed like a hospital room. The first thing I noticed was I was laying on what appeared to be a hospital bed. I immediately assumed I'm in a hospital. As I realized there is no way I could be in a hospital, I began to look around. I noticed the walls of the room have a dark metallic color. This freaked me out because I know hospital rooms have bright colors and do not have metal walls. I was trying to understand where I was, and the more things I noticed, the more disoriented and scared I became. I then glanced to my right and I saw 2 people dressed in white attire. Then near my feet 2 more. Then to my left a person sitting in a chair beside my bed. My attention was concentrated on the person in the chair. I soon realized I was unable to move, almost like sleep paralysis. I would describe it as like being in a coma, but with complete mental awareness. I could see and hear everything around me. The person in the chair was a human female. At least that is what she looked like. I was frightened. I remember her telling me to stay calm and it would all be over soon. She then pushes a needle into my left arm, like an IV needle but different. The needle required no tape to hold it in place, which was weird. The needle was an odd metal that gave off a strange luster. Her telling me to stay calm, to me, meant I was screwed. I was beginning to panic. One of the people standing at the bottom of the bed was holding a LED-like light on a long wire. I was told that it was used to decipher who I was. The light was placed on the sole of my left foot. I didn't feel any pain, but suddenly blacked out. I woke in the same room, not knowing how much time had passed. I was alone. Soon, someone came into the room, I never saw a door, and I began to move. I assume I walked out of the room and was now in a hallway. On one side was a dark metal flat wall. I noticed a door. I opened it and was in a room very similar to the one I was in before. I closed the door and start walking down another hallway in the opposite direction. I pass many more rooms identical to what I just came out of. I eventually reached an area with a giant window. Maybe 20 feet tall and 50 feet wide. I approached the window and saw the clouds and surface of Earth, thinking we were orbiting the planet. I then knew I had been abducted and was in a craft of some type. I again started to panic. I looked around me and observed humanoids walking by me. But these were not human. They had olive-colored skin that appeared wet, but actually dry like that of a reptile. The faces had human features, but more ethnic. I then noticed what appeared to be gills on each side of their faces. It was a startling sight, like their cheeks had been sliced open. They are quite tall, about 7 feet or so, and muscular. They wore no clothes or uniforms, but I couldn't tell if they were of any gender. I approached one of the beings and asked, "Is this real?" It grabbed my arm and glared at me with its golden-colored eyes. The next thing I remember was waking up on the bedroom floor in my apartment in Miami, not the hotel room near Naples. I believe I went into shock. I was suddenly sick to my stomach and shivering. I looked where the needle had been inserted into my arm, and there was a small scab. I looked at the clock, it was 11:10 a.m., but I was unsure what day it was. I felt exhausted and wanted to do nothing but sleep. It turned out that I had about 36 hours of lost time. I also had a painful bruise on the sole of my left foot, where the light object touched me. I later contacted the friend I shared the hotel room with. They said that when they woke, I was gone, but my bed had been made. All of my personal property, my wallet and phone, were gone as well. They said that they called me, but it immediately went to voicemail. There were no messages on my phone. I have no idea what happened, but my life has changed. I have suffered extreme anxiety for no apparent reason, other than I feel that they may abduct me in the future. JJ.
This is Lon Strickler. If you like this program, it would help us if you would give it a thumbs up. Then subscribe and click the bell icon so you get notification when we upload new first-person encounters. We have many more to come very soon. And by the way, if you have a suggestion or an experience of your own, please leave a comment.